Here we are talking about the Makita 6406 basic 3/8 drill. This is actually replaced by the 6408, which is actually a bit pricey now, and they aren't quite built like they used to be. This is with Makita. They've been dating their tools for a long time, so we've got 1996 and in March, back when they were still built in America in Buford, Georgia, with even American-made Jacobs chuck. This is one of the early versions of the hand-tight chucks, and it's really not so bad. Another thing is this is still when they were polycarbonate fiberglass reinforced, so super heavy duty bodies. I had talked about the Makita drills and their older style handles when I reviewed the 6302H, which you can still find online. What was kind of interesting about Makita is they're a company that if it ain't broke, it don't fix it, like the 6013BR Spade handle half-inch drill. It's been the same drill for like 40 years or something. This has been the same drill for like at least 30. And what's kind of hilarious, you say, oh, this is the older handle style, this must be the older one. No, this was made in the year 2000, December. So they just been continuing to make these things. Actually, they recently stopped the half-inch drill, but they did redesign the 3/8 drills, and they actually redesigned them again, but they're nylon body now. They're more powerful, 5.2 amp motor, 2500 RPM, but kind of pricey. Really, I'd recommend like one of those 8 amp Milwaukees or DeWalt's. This style, though, this little 3.3 amp 2100 RPM drill is about right because it's smaller, it's more compact, it only weighs 3 pounds versus those bigger 8 amp ones like from DeWalt. I have one, I'm not going to bust it out here. No real reason, because they're getting really big, they're very powerful, but this is more of just a home utility grade drill, and somebody would have bought this. This is still would have been like 50-60 bucks in the mid 90s. Something better than just like the Black & Deckers. You know, this was back in the 90s when Makita was absolutely #1 in cordless tools. So they had big name recognition. And when you didn't want to get just a basic Black & Decker or something, you might step up to the Makita because it is pretty nice. You know, once again, the polycarbonate body really, you know, has a belt hook, a decent chuck. It's going to be all ball bearing. We'll take a look inside after we do a little drilling test here. But definitely a little bit better quality. This was when they were still putting the rubber boot over the trigger. The biggest criticism of this drill, and that's probably why I found it with hardly any use on it, is it probably has the strongest spring I've ever felt in my life. It's ridiculous. It's like 10 or 15 pounds. It's just totally insane. This is a type of, this trigger is so rigid that it will hurt your finger. Really kind of disappointed about that. I was like, wow. You know, what a faux pas to have such a nice drill with a really, you know, more updated grip, really ergonomic grip. And for some reason, they chose to put in just like an absolute monster spring in the trigger, even though it's very linear. Plenty of airflow and actually pretty quiet considering. And so that's what I like about these little drills. Is they are just convenient, and this Makita was just one of the better ones. And you got a lot of features: ball bearing, polycarbonate body, you know, you get a rubberized cord, a little boot over the switch. Really not a bad little 3/8 drill, and I think that's kind of what manufacturers have lost now, is the drills are now, even those basic homeowner pistol grip drills, they're still just 70 bucks, you know, at the orange box, are now like 5 pound plus drills that are plenty, you know, hugely powerful with 8 amp motors, but they're just getting really long and heavy, and that was kind of defeats the purpose of what a general high-speed 3/8 drill is this is a general purpose utility drill where you don't really need a ton of power. You're just driving Spade bits, small wood bits, small holes in steel, maybe some occasional screw driving, not building decks. But, you know, other occasional stuff is exactly what you want. And you don't want something that weighs a quarter of a ton and you know, has a 1 horsepower motor, because it just, you know, unless you're using it in a, you know, professional production type situation, it's really just, you're not getting it out of it. So besides the really stiff trigger, the boot kind of makes the reverse switch really mushy, but I suppose that's okay. Otherwise, I just wanted to do a review. Not many reviews of this model Makita, which is, I think, one of their better ones, and just kind of a hark back of the nice American-made Makitas. All right, let's see if it has enough power to throw down one of these 3-inch deck screws. That ought to do that. Takes forever to grab. I did just stall it out there, but it did sink it. Let's see if I can't do a better job. There we go. So it will do. That's actually not too bad at all. It threw those in reasonably well. Let's back those out and then drill a hole. These motors do have less power in reverse. Let's see if we can get its own screws out. Yeah. Those are hot. Let me get a bit in here. All right, we've got a 1-inch spade bit, and this is just the kind of the point to show you that even this is only a 3.3 amp motor at 2100 RPM. That's a decent RPM, but gives it just a little bit lower of a gear ratio, so it still has the power. So it ought to drive this 1-inch spade bit just fine too. And just to show you that really it's just fine. You think I should sharpen that bit? I'm practically having to stand on the thing, and this is one of those special Bosches that has the self-feed screw tip on it, and I'm still having to just yam on it. So it struggles a little bit, but it actually is doing just fine. But as you can see, really, it does, once again, it does just fine. And if you had a nice sharp 1 1/4 inch or even a 1 1/2 inch spade bit, you can get away with it. You'd have to go a little bit easy. But it shows you it really works just fine for definitely most purposes. So let's take a quick look inside here. We do have 7 screws holding this together. These are Plastite screws. And since they're in polycarbonate, they actually are pretty darn rigid. The staining is, of course, after 25 years, the oil just seeps through the two split halves of the case. And then with polycarbonate, it's particularly bad. The grease really will stain it, and it is fairly permanent. Here we are. We'll just split these two case halves. There happens to be a little vent and a little thing in the back just to make that easier back here. And almost all tools, the case half that you pull off first will be the side that has the screws on it, but occasionally it's different, so you always want to double check. And so on the inside, you can really see when you use polycarbonate, the fiberglass, even though this is 15%, and many power tools with nylon, they're using 35% nylon. Just polycarbonate is just so much heavier duty, but it has this neat little sheen, this kind of very interesting effect. It's very distinctive, pretty much impossible to mistake. Anyway, not much to this drill. It is really pretty basic and straightforward. Not the heaviest duty, but it definitely pretty respectable, surprisingly enough. We have a large bearing for the main spindle support bearing, another ball bearing on the back of that, and ball bearings on both sides of the motor, so you are getting all ball bearing construction. We can see on this motor that these are actually pretty wide contacts, so this motor just doesn't have as much field density. There's not as many windings on the rotating part. The armature is on a bit more powerful drills, and that's one of the ways they actually sneak more power through a motor of the same size, is they just add more windings. And so the brush, they can end up deploying more power because the brushes are able to contact more than one set of winding at the same time. On this type of drill, it's basically one set of windings. And so that's one way that they save just a bit of cost. We can see that they didn't put any kind of, they did dip it in resin, but there isn't any kind of additional wrapping or heavy duty protection for the wiring on the back of the motor. It's just folded over pinched contacts. So those are some of the ways. Thermoplastic, or excuse me, ABS brush holders instead of, say, brass metal brush holders. So that's some of the things that set it apart of being a more basic drill, but it really did have it where it counts. Even though it had like a slower, more basic, wide, lower number of poles motor, they still did it properly with the boot and a decent Lucerne switch, which is rated at 4 amps, so it's a 3.3 amp drill. That's okay. It's not particularly overrated, but it is, you know, reasonable. You can see this thing's like totally new. Other than that, it's really what you expect. You know, they don't even have a shield on the rear ball bearing because they just expect that it's sealed through this little, you know, cutout there in the back of the drill motor. So they just figure it's going to get protected. Although it would have been nice to see a little shield there. Other than that, just real straightforward. You need to replace the power cord. That's just super, super straightforward. Although the strain relief is an integrated molding on the power cord. So if you did have to replace the power cord, you have to dig up another strain relief. That you can see that there isn't any kind of cord pinch mechanism in here to actually hold a power cord. So it's actually relying on the over molded strain relief itself to prevent you from pulling it out. So that's a little bit cheesy because you have to find the right type of power cord. Although you could probably do something where you wrap it, you know, the wires around this post or something like that, zip tie them or something like that. Which is, at least there's that available option because there's just a big cubby hole in the bottom of the drill, so there is plenty of space. Otherwise, not a lot else to talk about. It does have helical cut gears. On the more powerful DeWalt's, they're the same design, single reduction. But on those 8 amp DeWalt's, it's so much power that actually causes the motor spindle to deflect under high load. So they actually have another special bearing on the tip of the spindle nose bearing just to prevent it from bending over. But this is only 3 amps, so it's just fine. Pretty wide gears. Really exactly what you would expect. And does Makita justice. It's a nice little drill to have, especially when they're ball bearing like this. I can't even believe it. It may have even performed better than my tests. I have it apart here, and as I'm putting it in, I see this little wires coming out, so I go to push it in, and I notice this thing wasn't even pushed in far enough to lock into the pinch connector. This may have been why it was donated. It may have been a intermittent operation because of that. That obviously isn't a very solid connection. So that actually even goes to show you, with not a very solid connection, it still performed pretty well. Remember that. If they don't have a little window, these wires are held in just by a metal spring-loaded barb, so you have to get like a pin or a, you know, an O-ring pick and jam it down in there to push the barb aside. So you always got to make sure to really push the wires in, and then give them a little tug to make sure that they're actually in there, and then, you know, you're done. So there's my review of this little Makita drill, and it was neat, interesting to find that loose wire inside because now it'll perform a little bit better, especially when it's under load and trying to deliver all that current, even with now the wire's actually secured instead of just barely touching. And I'll have to do a video. I have a DeWalt that's better. The one Achilles heel of these clamshell drills is if you really use them, then the steel bearing, you know, even in polycarbonate, ends up wallowing out the plastic that the bearing is held in. You end up getting some play. Of course, they start out like this with the spindle is just totally tight. When that happens, you just use some pieces of steel shim stock that you put, you know, in the case to take up the space. And I'll have to do a video about that. But that's usually something that happens after you put dozens and dozens of hours on a tool. Otherwise, this Makita is pretty neat. It does seem to run a little better with the properly connected wire. And thought I'd just do a little video because I haven't done a lot of power tools recently, and I thought this one was pretty cool. This is a pretty optimal drill that I probably will end up using just because it's small and compact, and in many cases, it's really exactly what I need. I don't need my big 8 amp DeWalt, which is really long and pretty heavy. This is just perfect for most general purpose drilling, and it would be kind of nice if manufacturers would still kind of make drills like this, because not only are they cheap and they allow people with lower budgets to actually get into name brand tools that are, you know, pretty well built. It just seems over the years the entry level to any professional brand, you know, a DeWalt or Makita or Milwaukee, it just seems that that floor keeps on getting higher and higher. Like the cheapest tools are, you know, now more expensive than the cheapest ones earlier that were still decent. So that and the fact of just having a small drill is exactly what a lot of people want, just not one that has a 20-pound spring in it. And the 6408, you know, is more modern, but this was one of the, I think those newer ones are unfortunately made in China, so this may be one of the last of the American-made ones, but it certainly was a nice competitive little drill, and I'm glad I own one now. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.